Peter, you wrote in the Sunday Sun Herald that the Nelson surveys and the like showing 56% of Australians believe in heaven and something like 37%.
I'll tell you what I said. I was quoting The Good Weekend, and it was something about 56% of Australians believe in heaven, 42% believe in hell, 35% believe in witchcraft, 25% believe in spiritual healing. And I said, should these people be allowed to vote? And it's true. I mean, you believe in devil, you believe in God, you believe in witches. Please, this is the 21st century. Look at what's been happening in the Catholic Church that's been exposed in the last little while. There is right in the very heart of organised church a demonic force, an evil thing, which is pedophilia, and that's been flourishing right there in the heart of the Catholic Church for ages.
In about February of 2007, I had recently started a new job, and it involved visiting churches in the Wollongong region. So one Sunday morning, I was just went to a little country town on the south coast, kind of completely ordinary, and I went to church, and it was very ordinary. I'm a part of the Anglican Church, and we do ordinary like no one else. And so we have the ordinary church meeting in the ordinary building, and then we went into the church hall in this little country town and having the kind of prerequisite tea and biscuits and so on. And in the middle of this, a young mum walked up to me. I could tell she was a young mum because she had a toddler with her. She's about in her early 30s, I guess, little baby boy, or 2 or 3. And she kind of called me over just on her own, and she said to me, "I hope you don't think I'm weird. I want you to come and, would you please come and pray in my house because we've got spirits, or I think the house is haunted or something." Now, she's immediately got my attention, and then she proceeded to tell me things. I said, "Well, what is it that's happened?" So she said she's seen these apparitions and around the house, these things appearing. She's walked into her daughter's bedroom and seen an old lady sitting on the bed, on the end of the bed that her daughter was lying in. She said her toddler hadn't learned to talk yet, but she was the house used to belong to her grandparents, and she was throwing out some stuff that belonged to the grandfather, and the little boy walked into the garage and said, "Don't throw that out, Jack wouldn't like that," and then wandered off. As I just kind of asked a few more questions, she said she thought her grandparents had lost a child, and the grandmother had never quite been able to come to terms with that, and she'd been involved in seances and kind of strange stuff to try and contact the dead, and somehow this had happened. So I'm thinking, okay, let's go. So we walk across the road, up the hill, we walk into her house. I meet her husband, who's just your average Aussie bloke. He's there doing some work in the backyard, flannelette shirt, work boots, etc. And I said to him, "Mate, you must think this is really weird, me turning up to pray." And he just looked at me and went, because he'd seen it too. He was not a Christian, not a churchgoer, but it had freaked him out. And so I stood outside the 8-year-old's bedroom, opened the door, looked in and saw an 8-year-old's room. And nothing spooky happened. I prayed with her that Jesus would take whatever it is away. My understanding is I made a few phone calls later, these things stopped happening and she stopped coming to church. Now, what do you make of that? Do you believe me? Because I believed her. I said to Ian Powell, who speaks here regularly as well, my aim this week is to appear sane. And you're sitting there thinking, why is this week so different? Anyway, and as I've been trying to prepare this talk, I've been thinking, what possessed me to want to speak on this topic? Because, our mate with the red bandana who was here last week, Peter Fitzsimons, let me show you one of the things that he wrote in the Fitz files about a month ago in the Sun Herald. Here it is, in his usual kind of gentle way. According to the Good Weekend, this is a proportion of surveyed Australians who believe in 1, heaven, 56%, hell, 38%, the devil, 37%, and witches, 22%. Should they be allowed to vote? Discuss. Send angry emails. See if I care. And it gets readership, doesn't it? And did you notice that if you were here last week, you notice what he said was this: it's the 21st century, how can we possibly believe in this stuff anymore? How can we possibly believe in this stuff? I guess I just want to take a step back and say, well, Peter, if he was here, who is we? Who is the we? Because when you look at that same poll that he's quoting, I went back and checked what the Good Weekend, a Nielsen poll of 1,000 Australians in December 2009, 51% of Australians polled said they believed in angels. 51%. Now, that's significantly more than what either Julia Gillard or Tony Abbott to be Prime Minister. If you voted, Angel Gabriel would get elected rather than those guys. And you know, there's only 12% of women and 20% of men, 12% of women and 20% of men say in that survey that they're hardcore atheists. Who's the we? And other cultures are much more likely to be aware of or believe in the spirit world, the supernatural world, than the Anglo culture. So, African culture, much more aware of this, much stronger beliefs, and Asian culture as well, and even Asian culture in 21st century Australia. So I talked to my wife, who's Chinese, about this topic coming up, and she said to me, "Okay, here's another story," and I'll tell you the story and then say what I'm trying to show from it. My mother-in-law, who not surprisingly is Chinese as well, my mother-in-law had one of her relatives die a month ago yesterday, an old uncle. And this old uncle's daughter-in-law had been very kind to him and driven him around and done things and looked after him. And she'd take him to a particular shopping centre and he would sit outside a newsagent's while she went and did whatever jobs had to be done. And when she came back, a number of times he said to her, "You know, you should buy some lottery tickets in this newsagent's, it would be lucky." She didn't normally buy lottery tickets, didn't think much of it, never did it. However, in the last month after his funeral, she was in that newsagent's and thought, why not? She bought 5 lottery tickets. I couldn't quite, my mother-in-law, I couldn't quite get, I think they were scratchies, but because they paid immediately. 5 lottery tickets. Every one of those 5 tickets won, and she walked away with more than $100,000. Now that happened. That's just the mother-in-law straight, right there. 100,000. Now what does that? Does that prove the supernatural? No. Although it's a weird story, isn't it? No. What does it show? It shows that even in 21st century Australia, kind of clear-thinking, rational Chinese people, how do they understand it? Oh, what a random thought. No, they understand it as, she looked after him, and now he is in the spirit world, he has decided to look after her. And so I'd say, we can't believe in that anymore. Who's we? Who's the we? And so it's really just the very small percentage of materialistic Western world people who point at this and say this is ridiculous. And the rest of the world points back and say, actually, no, for you to not believe in this is ridiculous. So, angels and demons, how do we... there's huge interest in it. I went to a bookshop. I was in a bookshop in Paddington last week. It was a second-hand bookshop, and I knew I was speaking on this topic, so I had a quick look. Guess which was bigger? The section on witchcraft, angels, the occult, astrology, spiritualism, or the section on science? Huh? The science section was okay, but the supernatural thing, why? It sells. It's interesting. People went... There's all sorts of different views on it and kind of spirituality and angels and so on. As I've researched this, I got onto one website that would tell me how to channel or get in touch with the archangels and get help whenever you want. Interesting idea. So and the spirit world is big business. So why listen to me? Well, answer for the next few minutes. I will tell you what Jesus says about it. So don't listen to me, listen to Jesus and what he taught. It's interesting to notice that we've run a number of panels this year. Between Wednesday and Thursday, we've had 4, and there's been different people who've been atheists, or said they're atheists, who've been kind enough to come along. And it's been very interesting. But what's been extra interesting is, of those atheists, most of them have been Christian atheists. In fact, Chris Berg on Wednesday last week actually called himself that. It's a clever title, I'm going to steal it. He's a Christian atheist. Why? He liked the teachings of Jesus, the moral teachings. He could see the power and the goodness in them. They just don't want the other half or the rest of what Jesus said, and that is that there is a supernatural world. that there's a spiritual battle going on, that no one is neutral. So we want to take what Jesus said that's obviously true about the way to treat people, but not take the rest. But you can't separate the two. Jesus talks about the way that we should behave in view of God and the supernatural world and future and so on. Okay, here we go. Long introduction. Angels and demons. What does the Bible say? If I could speak with all reverence and care, the Bible's quite frustrating on this topic. Why? Because there's so many questions I'd like to ask that just aren't answered. And I thought, man, if one of the Bible writers just could sit down and just knock out a couple of chapters and just answer all these questions, it would be so good. But the Bible writers aren't really interested in that. It's much more a kind of a functional need to know. We're just told what we need to know rather than the answers to all the questions that we'd like. The Bible's not into answering our intellectual curiosity. It's much more practical about how to live and what the truth that we need to know. And the Bible references, you'll notice I've put in your program a number of different Bible references. It's hard to find one particular section of the Bible to speak on because the references to angels and demons are sprinkled across the whole Bible, although there's a concentration in the Gospels, and I'll explain why in a moment. So let me give you the vibe about angels and the vibe about demons, and then I'll give you a quick summary of some facts in the Bible. The vibe with angels, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Hebrew word and the Greek word both just mean messenger. Messenger. So the Greek word angelos can equally apply to a human messenger or an angelic, a supernatural messenger. And angels turn up and they make these kind of cameo appearances and then they're gone. It reminds me of that classic thinking person's film, Wayne's World. Now, any of you going to own up to having seen Wayne's World? Just a brief nod. No, well done. Thank you for it. The rest of you should see it. In Wayne's World, Mike Myers is Wayne. And towards the end of the movie, they stop and get directions at a service station. And the guy who plays the service station assistant does a really poor job of it. And Mike Myers actually stops and says to the camera, can't we get somebody good to play the service station guy? Next thing, Charlton Heston steps in, dressed as a service station attendant. And he says about 3 lines, and then he's gone. And you kind of think, hey, wait a minute, wasn't that, that was Charlton Heston, but he's gone. Now, it's like that when an angel turns up, and particularly the 2 archangels, Gabriel and Michael. So you look, I put on your outline there, Luke chapter 1, when the angel turns up to tell Zechariah, the old priest, that he's going to have a son named John, who'll become John the Baptist, who we know about from history. Look at 11 verse 1. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense, because Zechariah worked in the temple then. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. And then the angel tells him what's going to happen, and so on. And then I can't help but smile a little bit as I read verse 18. Zechariah asked the angel, how can I be sure of this? I'm an old man and my wife is well along in years. That's code for something, if you know. Anyway, the angel answered, verse 19, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God and I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. He says one more sentence and then he's gone. He's gone. But the vibe about angels, they are from the presence of God. They bring light and life and truth. The vibe about demons, the Greek word daimonion, is parallel to unclean spirit in the New Testament. And whenever they turn up, it's like when you turn the light on in a room and the cockroaches, hypothetically speaking, if one had cockroaches at one's home, you turn the light on and what do the cockroaches do? They're straight for cover into the darkness. And it's like that with the demons and the evil spirits. They kind of scuffle around at the edge of the light of the Bible and you kind of get a look at them, but you kind of don't. But it's always to do with death and darkness and decay and evil. Here we go. Let me give you some very quick facts then in terms of angels and what you can actually learn from the Bible. 1, the word angel means messenger. as I've covered, sometimes in the New Testament you have to work out from the context, does angelos mean a human messenger or a divine messenger? Okay. 2, they are created beings. The Bible does not say when a human dies, they become an angel. I know sometimes when people are grieving over the loss of a loved one, especially a child, and it just rips your heart out, people say, oh, well, they've become an angel. No, the Bible doesn't say that. It may be precious to God, yes, but angels are a different order of being. There are many thousands of them. So Revelation chapter 5 talks about thousands of angels before the throne of God. What do they look like when they appear? Well, they appear usually as described in human form, accompanied by light and shining and power, and they're very scary because the first thing that they say when they turn up and someone sees them is, don't be afraid. And you only say don't be afraid when the person's quivering, okay? So they turn up and say, don't be afraid. But there's a tantalising little verse in Hebrews chapter 13 verse 2 that says this, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some people have entertained angels without knowing it. So when they turn up, they don't always have to look kind of shining and scary. Maybe they're just very ordinary. Maybe God uses ordinary messengers. The idea of a guardian angel, I know people want to say that little people or people who belong to Jesus have a particular guardian angel that looks after them. It could be. Certainly the teaching that God protects his people with these messengers. There's only really one verse, Matthew 18 verse 10, that talks about the angels, their angels, regarding the little ones who follow Jesus. It could be. I wouldn't want to build too much on it. What's the Bible say about angels? They are simply spiritual beings that are not physical, spiritual beings sent as messengers. There's no promise that anyone in particular will ever see one, be aware of them and so on, even the followers of Jesus. Demons. What's the Bible say about demons? Well, the Bible talks about fallen angels, or angels who are involved in some kind of rebellion when, at the time of creation, but it's vague. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4 says, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them into gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment, etc. So the idea is that the angels rebelled against God under their leader, we'll come to that in a second, and God has put them in a place and held them till the judgment day. Although the tricky thing is, there's any number of evil spirits kind of running around doing different things, and these demons are active. So are they fallen angels? Are they unclean spirits? It's just, like I say, it's just hard to get a handle on it all exactly. In the Old Testament, demons are referred to in some way linked to this idea of the goat or a goat idol, or it means kind of this hairy thing that lives in the wild. The word satyr, or however it's said, S-A-T-Y-R. You see in mythology the kind of half goat, the guy with the goat's legs and the little horns, and so on. That's linked to that somehow. And then you follow that through, and the goat is actually linked to the satanic. In the New Testament, the word demon is parallel to unclean spirit. Peter Bolt, in his book, which has now disappeared. Thank you. Peter Bolt, in his book called Living with the Underworld, Peter Bolt's a lecturer at Moore Theological College. Peter says actually the origin of the word daimonion, demon, can also mean a spirit of the dead or ghost. Now what that means as it works itself out, I'm not sure. If you are interested to read more about this, Peter's book is a good introduction. The demons are talked about as having a leader, the prince of demons, Satan. More about him next week. Now, as I said, the idea of the demons or the evil spirits is actually concentrated in the Bible into the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and concentrated particularly into the 3 years of Jesus' public ministry, where you get like this giant arm wrestle between Jesus and the kingdom of God and the kingdom of the evil one. And you have people who are, as far as I can remember, the New Testament doesn't use the word demon-possessed, but it talks about having an evil spirit, or an evil spirit getting control of someone to the point of controlling their actions and so on. Now, we're not told what they did, like how this happened. What it does show, I think every time, is that demon possession manifests itself in sickness. In sickness. They are sick. But the New Testament people of the New Testament times are not fools. They can tell the difference between demon possession and illness. So in Mark chapter 1, Jesus goes into the synagogue. There's a man there with an evil spirit. Jesus casts the spirit out, and then Peter's mother is sick with a fever. They can tell the difference. And so what do you see? You see Jesus actually being stronger. Jesus casts these spirits out of people and sets them free. More about that next week. And today, I think in our country, this idea of demon possession is very rare. I think it is very unusual. However, the devil and demons are very active. I'll say more about it next week, but really their great aim is deception. Their great weapon is the lie. And they've got most of Australia believing the meaning of life is about how much stuff I have, and we're all off to Westfields and ignoring God. Or any other shopping centre. I don't mean particularly to have a go at Westfields. Okay. One last thing. The Bible tells us that demons, or these evil spirits, stand behind the gods, the idols that the pagans worshipped. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And what do? These things, they talk about these things deceiving people and leading people astray. And what do? They bring evil and they destroy people. Did you notice, if you were here last week, there are some times when something is so evil you think, no, this couldn't just be kind of human nature. And last week, Peter Fitzsimons talked about pedophilia and the abuse of children, and that being inside a religious institution, which is awful. And he used the words, inside a religious institution, you've got this demonic kind of activity. I think he said more truth than he intended to. And there are times when you just feel, no, this is somehow beyond ordinary evil. Now, the difficulty we have, if you like, we had in the panel last week a man who kindly came along. He's a spiritualist, a New Age guy involved with the spirit world. The difficulty about all that is not that the spiritual experiences are not real. I believe they are. The difficulty is you don't know who or what you're dealing with. That's the point. And the Bible, actually, the Old Testament is very clear about the existence of mediums, that these things do happen, that you can contact the spirit world and be in touch with them. And the Old Testament says, stay away from these things. They're evil. That's the point. They're deceptive, they're evil. Do you know, in so many cultures, people live in fear of the spirit world, in fear of upsetting their ancestors, in fear of the spirits that control the world around them, and so on. And as the Christian message has been embraced by different cultures, that fear of the spirit world recedes. It's ironic, really, that as that fear's receded in our culture, some people have gone on to say then, well, there is no spirit world at all. In fact, just in passing, if I could say, once you actually understand that the world is controlled not by these spirits, but by a creator who's put certain laws and regularities into place, then the rise of science is possible. So what's the Christian message? The Christian message is this, that Jesus is the master of the supernatural world, and that one day he will destroy all evil. These creatures, these things, whatever they are that are evil, he will destroy them. And ladies and gentlemen, this isn't an academic lecture. This is actually a very sharp edge on it, because Jesus taught we live in a spiritual battlefield. That there's the kingdom of God, those who can know God through Jesus, his King, and find forgiveness and the promise of eternal life. And there are those who belong to the kingdom of the evil one, who are deceived and on their way to death. And those two kingdoms wrestle. We know what the result will be, but there's a wrestle going on. And Jesus taught there is no one who's neutral. No one. And those who are the most at risk are those who don't believe in the struggle at all. So to just summarise, what's the Christian message? That Jesus is greater than the angels, infinitely greater. God himself, who stepped down to become a human being to rescue us, and that one day Jesus will rule the new creation, a world renewed without the consequences of sin, and that those humans who trust him can be a part of that. So angels, they're messengers, they're sent on jobs. Don't worry about them too much. And that Jesus is the ruler of the spiritual world. Jesus rules over evil spirits. You need not fear them if you belong to him, and that one day he will finally judge and destroy them. If you've never read the teachings of Jesus yourself, Luke's Gospel would be a very good place to start. On the table over there we have some that are free of charge, and grab one. Jesus teaches about angels, demons, heaven and so on as he walks through the Gospels. Someone asks, doesn't the Bible say that angels are sent to help us and that we have the ability to set them tasks? Certainly the Bible says that God sends angels to protect and care for those who belong to him. The Psalms say that. Psalm 34 and Psalm 91 as well talk about God sending angels to care for his people. I cannot think of anywhere the idea of us having the ability to set tasks for angels. These things are displayed in Revelation chapter 19. The Apostle John sees a vision of one of these, and thanks, Bogdan. Sees a vision of one of these angels and falls at his feet and is told, "Do not worship me, worship God." So they're impressive things that if you do see them, but there's no expectation that that will be the case now. What is your take on Job, on the book of Job? It seems that God gave authority to the devil to interfere with Job. Yes, if you want to, there's a cameo appearance by Satan or the Prince of Demons at the beginning of the book of Job, where God allows Satan to do certain things to Job in order to kind of test him and to teach him. But it's interesting, each time God says to Satan, you can go this far and no further. And then each time, it's like Satan's like a dog on a leash, and God just sets the length of the leash. And what you see in the Bible is that the devil opposes God wherever he can, but even his opposition fits into God's plans and brings about what God chooses. More about that next week. Why does God let demons exist and do their evil deeds on earth? Are we God's testing specimen? God could have destroyed demons and let us live with no temptations. That is, that is correct. God does allow these things to exist, the Bible says, and that ultimately they will bring about God's plans and purposes. And why he does it exactly that way, I don't think I can tell you. But you do see where these things can oppose God and actually be brought about in God's purposes. So Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is tempted by the devil in 3 different temptations. You can read that there. And yet God is able to use that to actually refine him and teach him obedience and make him the perfect one to save us. The devil enters Judas, who betrays Jesus, so Jesus is killed, and yet that brings about the purposes of God. Why exactly God has done it this way, I don't think we're told. But it's very clear when you get to the end of the book of Revelation that the devil, his angels, all that sort of thing will actually be destroyed. Why does God test us? Sometimes it's actually in terms of moulding and changing and our character and so on. If goats are linked to Satan, is it significant when Jesus talks about separating the sheep from the goats? Hadn't thought about that, but this idea of the goat and the devil being linked somehow, this goat idol thing being linked in the Old Testament, could be significant. I suspect it may be more to do with the fact that in the Middle East, it's actually hard to tell sheep from goats. Out where we live, here in Australia, the big buffy merinos and so on, and you can tell the difference. I was doing some ecotourism on a property in January, and they had a particular kind of sheep that until she showed me the difference between the sheep and the goats, I couldn't tell. I think that's more the issue, that Jesus will come to separate people, and sometimes it's hard to tell who belongs to him and who doesn't. In 1 Samuel, Saul, who's the king of Israel, then uses a medium to contact Samuel. Was it really Samuel who appeared? Yeah, that's one of those kind of Twilight Zone parts of the Bible. In 1 Samuel, Saul has walked away from God and God will not answer his prayers, and so Saul says, find me a medium. And they managed to find one woman who kind of... Anyway, and she calls up the ghost of Samuel, who gives Saul... Now, is it Samuel? There's no reason to assume that it's not from the Bible. What the spirit of Samuel says comes true, unfortunately, for Saul, and so it might be. But I'll tell you, if ever there's a part of the Bible to say don't have anything to do with mediums, it's that passage. Okay. Anyone thoughts, comments? Thank you. When I've said destroyed, it's a sloppy use of language. The Bible talks about the devil, his angels, and so on being thrown into the lake of fire, and so not terminating, but being excluded and sent to hell. Now, the lake of fire is a word picture. I think it's a picture of something of destruction, of it being terrible and so on. What it physically, literally is, I'm not sure that you can say. It's existence without all the good things of God. But yes, unfortunately, the devil, these things continue to exist. They will just be sent to the lake of fire. Thank you.